Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to all of you. So, we are here today to talk about intangible cultural heritage through the lens of sustainable tourism, specifically in the Himalayan region. A big thank you to Royal Enfield and UNESCO for bringing us all together in this room today. Our panelists today, as you can see sitting here, I've known some of them for many years. Some of them I've heard of, but I haven't met before. And they bring years and years of experience in the tourism and the community development space. So let me do a quick round of introductions for all of you. Next to me, I have Malika Virdi, who's a co-founder of Himalayan Arc and the sarpanch of the Sarmoli Jayanti Van Panchayat in Munsiari, Uttarakhand, where she has worked for many, many years, decades actually. Fayaz Ahmad Dar, educator, speaker, founder of the Sagg Eco Village in Kashmir. Ritu Sarin, the founder of the Dharamshala International Film Festival. And Tsewang Namgail, who works in Ladakh, conservationist and the leader of the Snow Leopard Conservancy Trust. Please give them a big hand. So all of them work and live in the Himalayan region. Malika ji in Munsiari, Fayaz in Kashmir, Ritu in Dharamshala, and Tsewang in Ladakh. I'm going to start today's discussion with Malika Virdi. Malika ji, you've of course lived and worked in Munsiari for decades and worked with the community there. Do tell us, what is the role the community plays in shaping the tourism profile of the region, especially with respect to climate change, what's happening right now, post-COVID implications, etc.
Thanks, Sonali. I think we're a small enough group, and I think it'll be nice if it remains a conversation. Before I talk about the rural community that I now belong to, I like calling myself a farmer. I live in a village. Uttarakhand has a very unique institution called the Van Panchayats. I don't know whether you're familiar with them, but essentially 10% of our state's geographical area is covered with Van Panchayats, 64% in our little valley. But before I go on to, what my role as a community member and tourism, all of us sitting here are travelers, tourists. All of us love going to places. Enfield has brought us together. Some of us are bikers, have traveled in all these places that we've come from. So what I would like to talk about is, the kind of gaze that we go into communities with. Each one of us loves traveling. I presume so. I mean, I do. But when we go to a new place, how do we perceive it? There's no such thing as a disinterested or an apolitical traveler. We all carry our concepts, we carry our notions, this whole thing of traveling as a metaphor for life, So we go with all this, if I can say, baggage and sometimes perspective. We're always going to discover some place, maybe discover ourselves. The smarter ones are actually looking inwards and not so much outwards. But, कर करा के हम लोग कहीं लोगों को ऑब्जेक्टिफाई भी कर देते हैं, कम्युनिटीज को ऑब्जेक्टिफाई कर देते हैं. We kind of commodify the place. We're selling a story. And somewhere I feel that now there are hardly any places left to discover because everything is so covered, talked about, that now the last frontier is, in a way, communities. We're going to, bag experiences, talk about them, describe them. Now I come to the other side where we receive these tourists and guests. So how do communities cope? And how do we understand what traveling and tourism is all about? So a little bit about the organization or the little enterprise that we set up. I came into tourism in a very awkward sort of way, not really a businesswoman. But when I was the sarpanch in my first term, a sarpanch not of the revenue village, but of the Van Panchayat. So our community has, say, 34 hectares of forest land. But if you see our entire valley, 64% of our landscape is actually owned and managed. The forests are managed by communities. Yet when you drive or ride into this, pristine landscape of the Himalaya, wherever you look, you don't see people and you think, oh, ye to, it's there for me to enjoy. It's my playfield, my playground. That's how tourists look at, spaces in the Himalaya. You ride in, it's, jahan tak nazar jati, it's yours. But these are landscapes that are intimately known by communities, owned and managed, and actually not to conserve for the sake of conservation, but conserve because our lives depend on it. The slope's stability depends on the health of the forest. Our livelihoods depend on those forests. So our relationship with the forest is very different. And I'm a city product that relocated and recast my life 30 years ago. And when I became a sarpanch for the first time, I was also talking, conservation. Bachana chahiye, it's heritage. And I realized there were no takers. Nobody was interested in this conversation on conservation. And for good reason, because for them, the forests are the natural resource base that makes it possible to live a life there. So you can't talk conservation if you don't talk livelihoods. So for me, it became my first step of education was that the two go together for communities that are, at least a lot of us who live in the mountains, understand this very clearly. And that's how we came to tourism. And just like there is no disinterested traveler tourist, everybody comes with an agenda, a worldview, a vision. We sell places with our pictures, stories. Similarly, there's no such thing as a isolated community. Sometimes, the more, in quotes, remote or distant we are exoticized, sometimes when you see pictures like this here in a place like Delhi, you see, grand landscapes like this, you imagine that this is somewhere else, the elsewhere, the other. And why I'm repeatedly talking about this and making this connection is that inadvertently, this is what tourism, actually very, very pointedly, and inadvertently for people like us, we are always othering communities. And I think that is a big problem with this kind of travel and tourism. Enfield has, hosted this event, but we know that motorcyclists have a very bad rep in most of these places because they come roaring down the roads with their fantasies of freedom, escaping from the, stark, pretty lousy reality of cities and then going to discover places. And they create a nuisance of themselves. They dip into the resources that we depend on. So having a conscious traveler, creating these kind of meeting places where we begin to talk about living heritage, not museum pieces. This is a lovely exhibition and it evokes a good sense of, a connection with the earth and our landscape. But I think we should go beyond those easy fixes. And as I see it, the big fix for me is communities who live on landscapes, who depend on them, who use, manage, and conserve them the way we do. Like, for instance, in Uttarakhand, just talking about Van Panchayats, we have 12,000 plus Van Panchayats. That's a huge number of communities that are invested in a landscape that travelers and tourists share with us. That we understand that these are owned and managed and that we do not just exoticize or even, we're collecting cultural heritage artifacts and talking about intangible cultural heritage, but should never forget who owns them. We might be telling their story, but it's not our story, it's their story. Ownership is crux. And somewhere we do take away ownership from communities because communities are also not homogeneous. The powerful will always sell their space and the notion of travel. It's the common people that we have to remember. One last question. How many of you have seen that movie, Aguera, Wrath of God? Werner Herzog's movie? Okay. So these colonialists, land up in places. This is the colonial period we're talking about, but it's still happening. It happened in Australia. You go onto a continent, you see these vast landscapes, and they say, "Arey, yahan par koi jhanda nahi hai. Nobody is claiming it. I claim it. It's mine. Terra nullius." You just imagine that if there is land in front of you, nobody owns it, nobody depends on it. So oftentimes the kind of gaze that travelers go into landscapes with is like that. You erase the existence of communities. The tourism industry will talk about the tourist, they'll talk about the tour operators, they'll forget the landscape and forget the people. And I think the lot of us sitting here are really here to represent and give voice to that reality. It is for now the travelers to understand that when you step onto a landscape, tread gently. Remember that it's home for people. And if one can keep that spirit, then perhaps the old way of traveling, the pilgrimages, not the mass tourism of these organized treks and package holidays, maybe then we can begin to change travel a bit. Thank you, Sonali.
That is so relevant these days. Exoticizing people. I was just talking to someone the other day, and I think companies, state governments, the central government, we are trying to bring out new products for tourists because we are always trying to look for something different. Tribal tourism, mining tourism, it boggles your mind. How can you do this? You are going to someone's home, like Malika ji said, you're going to someone's home. You are the guest, tread lightly. Leave your muddy boots outside. That is what we forget most of the time. Fayaz, I'll move on to you. So you relocated back to Kashmir, resettled, I would say, in 2010, after many years of living in Delhi and elsewhere. So you are so passionate about ecological entrepreneurship. So tell us a little bit about that and your work in Sagg Village and with the Mool Sustainability Training Center.
Well, thank you so much, Sonali ji, and thank you so much, everybody. And I'm so glad for this opportunity and want to congratulate the organizers and everybody who's participating. So there's so much I want to sort of repeat from what Malika ji has said already, but I'll try to not to repeat things because I resonate with so much she has said, and I think all of us are on the same wavelength there. I mean, the way we see things, the way we want things, the way we imagine things. So the earliest memory I have of discomfort, the conscious memory, is when I was around 5-year-old. Probably I was working in the farm with my family and planting rice in the muddy water, fields. And my father sort of called me out. It was around 9:30 in the morning and asked me to change, clean up and go to school. And I was so scared of going to school. I did not want to go to school. And I was trying to be very efficient at planting rice, because I wanted to see me as a productive sort of a worker who could help him. But unfortunately, that didn't work, and I was sent to school. So anyway, I spent a few years in the local school, and then I won a scholarship to go to a hostel, even farther away from my family, and that was another level of sort of milestone for me of this memory of discomfort with how things were. The first one, I was a productive worker in the farm that could help my family and my father, but my father instead wanted me to go and study something that I didn't understand. And in a way and manner, the methodology was so alien that I didn't really like it. And then in the second instance, I was sent away from the family to live in a hostel, supposedly for, to get better education. But anyway, so I sort of underwent another level of trauma and personal sort of emotional turbulence through those experiences. So I'm citing these examples to sort of give you a glimpse into my upbringing and my childhood and how sort of the narrative, the dominant narrative, how, for example, we are talking about intangible cultural heritage. And the name itself suggests that we don't necessarily understand the whole of it. It's intangible. A lot of it is subconscious and a lot of it is unconscious. So, but with the way things are, the way the schooling system or the educational system works, or the way the development paradigm works, it disregards a lot of these intangible things, intangible wisdoms, intangible resources that the local communities have and have developed over millennia. For example, what is culture? Culture, for example, Kashmiri culture is the cumulative experience of all the people who have ever lived in Kashmir, and through their practical experience, they have devised ways and means to live. They have sort of, after all this experience and experimentation, they know what to eat, how to grow that food, how to preserve that food, what buildings to build, what clothes to wear, how to manage relationships in that area, and how the seasons work, everything. So unfortunately, when we talk about cultural preservation in today, most of the people, in my experience, I talk to a lot of young people especially, people feel like, and also businesses, they feel like it's a burden. They feel like it's an added responsibility. They have to fend for themselves, of course. They have to make a career, make a life, then their family, and then they have to also preserve culture. Unfortunately, that's how the businesses, and same with ecology, that's how also ecology is looked at. We have to protect the environment. No, it does not need protection. Environment doesn't need our protection. We need to ensure that we survive, and we survive in harmony, and we live happy lives. And I think, again, that is our endeavor. That is the human endeavor, is to live satisfying, happy lives. And that is possible only when we think about holistically about everything. So anyway, I was talking about culture. So because, why do we think of preserving culture or ecology as a burden? I will come back to, again, the schooling experience, because the way it is done, the methodology that the schooling, or then later on the college, the university, and then the careers we choose, the corporate world, how things work all around the world now in this presently dominant paradigm, we are alienated from ourselves, who we are, and then from our surrounding environments. I think that's the biggest challenge right now, is with our schooling, with our socialization, with our upbringing. And then there are these other elements, the media and how other things work. But I think primarily when, nowadays we are sending children to school when they are around 3-year-olds. We're sending them to crèches, then we are sending them to preparatory schools, then we are sending them to KG schools, and then we are sending them to schools. So all this experience, the way things are done and the things that they experience in the school and the way things are taught, they are alienated from themselves. They are unable to sort of be who they are supposed to be. All of us, in my belief is, all of us sort of are here for a purpose, for a mission, and human endeavor is, as I was saying, is about living happily, but with a mission. We are meant to take forward the evolution. We are meant to solve problems. We are meant to take on challenges. So, for my education and work, after spending I was about 15, that I had to come out of Kashmir. So, again, to study and work. And I spent some, 15, 16 years in Delhi, working for different organizations and studying. And finally, in 2009, I sort of decided to go back and work in Kashmir. I think one of the blessings for me coming out of Kashmir and traveling and seeing other cultures and contexts, it gave me insights into my own life, my own sort of journey, and also our own context. because Kashmir has a peculiar context. I mean, I won't go into details, but yeah, we have seen war, and we're still seeing many elements of that sort of have seeped into the society and are still unfolding. So, in a context like that, culture, obviously, as it is ingrained, so people respond and react from that mindset and their own culture. But to consciously design careers or design things, to improve things, to think about culture or think about ecology, that takes a backseat in a war zone. The primary occupation, mental as well as then the physical, is the security. So despite people having this realization and need and aspiration to help their community do more than themselves, they end up sort of sacrificing creativity for security. And I think this is a global phenomenon to a large extent, but particularly in a context that is sort of difficult, people end up doing that. So we have seen a lot of challenges around that. So because I happen to see other contexts, travel outside and gain these insights, I decided to go back and work with young people there, and that's how I started Mool Sustainability Research and Training Center. I was always fascinated coming from farming background. I really loved this idea of sustainability. And then I started working with younger people there, and also, so we did organize some participatory research projects with young people in Kashmir, in Ladakh, in Jammu as well, and partnering with other NGOs and academic institutions, and also talking to a lot of academics and researchers and thinkers. And a lot of people were talking about the problems in the educational system, the problems in the context, of course, and the challenges with livelihoods, and also that things like we need to have initiatives or careers or ventures that would improve the ecology, the quality of life, that will protect the environment, that will preserve the culture. But we were not seeing any practical initiatives on the ground. And that's how, after 3-4 years of that work with Mool Sustainability Research and Training Center, it gave sort of birth to this idea of Sagg Eco Village. So Mool is, I think most of you must know the Sanskrit or the Hindi version of it, but it's also a Kashmiri word which means roots. Again, a similar sort of connotation. So when I was going back, so that was my mindset, going back to roots and trying to understand where you come from and how do you grow from there. And then when we realized we needed a more practical initiative, because the non-profit paradigm does not allow for a lot of experimentation. So we sort of thought of creating an example of what people wanted. That's how Sagg Eco Village was born. So Sagg is another Kashmiri word which means watering, nurturing. So Sagg Eco Village is an experiment in ecological entrepreneurship. And our mission is to build regenerative and integrative lifestyles and communities. So from sustainability, as I see it progressing towards regenerative, because regenerative for me is sort of more alive. Sustainability I'm fascinated by, but the word regenerative means, I think, almost everything that sustainability means, but it also gives me a little more energy, makes it interactive for me. So Sagg Eco Village, the physical space is 1.5 acres, a natural farm, a cultural retreat, and a lifestyle research venture. So that designs, develops, and promotes recreational, educational, and lifestyle services, spaces, products, and programs for individuals, families, and groups. So, some of the elements of the village we have built infrastructure. We have built some mud huts. We have a dormitory. We have composting toilets. And we have an upcycling program, we have our own composting program, and we have a food preservation program, and we have educational camps and we host a lot of sort of travelers, of course, but also local student groups from schools, colleges, and universities. So we are interacting with a lot of, the existing institutions in that sense. So, in summary, I would sort of define ecological entrepreneurship that would also sort of summarize my own learning and the essence of our work and how we see the future. So ecological entrepreneurship is where you take into consideration the ecological needs and resources, and not as a burden, as I was saying earlier, but as a resource. You look at ecology as a resource. It's the biggest resource and it's free for everybody, And then you look at culture. You take cultural needs and resources. So culture, again, cultural wisdom would tell you how to be in a place, what to grow, as I was saying, what to wear, what to build, how to build. And if you want to do business in a certain place, then it will also tell you how to do business in a certain place. So without sort of disturbing the present environment or culture and the third element in that is humans. Humans are not separate from ecology. We are part of ecology and we are meant for a certain role, and we need to sort of connect with ourselves and our role and our responsibility in that sense, because that's at the back of everything. Who you think you are determines what you do in life. So you have to be able to answer this question for yourself: who you are and what do you want? What do you see your role in this world? And I think that is, underlies everything. And then the technology. I mean, technology is there, and I think, a lot of us are sort of hypnotized by technology, and especially I see a lot of younger kids just, going after technological sort of things and spending too much time there and not in the real present environment where they are. So to just give you a fact that I have sort of discovered to my surprise recently is that all of the technological development, all the innovations, all the discoveries, all the scientific advancement is the intelligence contained in all of the scientific endeavor is yet to amount to the intelligence contained in one living cell. So we need to be paying more attention to the ecology and the intelligence that is contained in ecology and in the universe and in the culture, rather than, being hypnotized by, a kid, which is a few hundred years of scientific advancement. So again, but technology is important, and we talk about, so integration of ecological needs and resources, cultural needs and resources, human needs and resources, and technological needs and resources in a way and manner to create profitable businesses, of course. I mean, museums are not places to preserve culture. If you want to preserve culture or anything, you got to bring it to life. You got to live it. You got to practice it. That's the only way you can preserve it. And then you also get a chance to add your experience to culture, because that's also, again, our responsibility. We're not supposed to sort of live the culture of, earlier times. We are here today. So we add our experience to culture, and the culture is also a living thing like us. It's a living phenomenon like human life. So we add our experience to it. So that's how we integrate it. We integrate ecology, culture, technology, and human endeavor to create profitable businesses that improve the quality of life and quality of ecology. So I'm, again, glad to be here and sharing our little experience with all of you, and looking forward to sort of taking forward the conversation with everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Fayaz. That was so wonderful. You can see the passion which is so evident in the way he speaks. And I'm so glad you're bringing in the youth, actually, into the fold to take the traditions forward. Ritu, coming to you. You've actually put Dharamshala on the map for cinema lovers across the world, not just nationally, internationally. Tell us a little bit about the Dharamshala International Film Festival and also, subsequently the work that you do with the communities and the mentorship program that you have.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, both of you. It was, there's so much to talk about, and I hope we'll have a chance to do that. And thank you for inviting me to be here on this panel, Aisha. So, I think ours is a very, very different story because it starts from storytelling itself. So Tenzing and me, who co-founded Dharamshala International Film Festival, are filmmakers and have been telling stories all our life. And that's the one thing we know we think we know how to tell stories a little bit. And mostly it's stories of people who, human stories are kind of our speciality, though we have done history and other things as well. And we've been living in Dharamshala for 26 years now. My family is from Dharamshala, and at one point we thought there is nothing contemporary here. So of course there's a lot of Tibetan culture. This is the center of the Tibetan exile world. There's a lot of Tibetan culture. There's some Gaddi culture. And all the cultures are changing. We are at a period in history where there's incredible fast change and technology is changing. There's rapid change. And how do people become modern Tibetans or modern Gaddis or modern local people? Because everyone, as we know, are going through and have like phones and they have, televisions, and everything is changing rapidly. And how do they deal with this change? How do they become modern villagers? How do they become modern Kashmiris or modern Himachalis or modern Tibetans? And I think that idea really was very important for us. And we thought, we had been to so many film festivals ourselves, and we found that when people get together and tell stories to each other, it's a great form of communication. So we decided to form the Dharamshala International Film Festival, and this was in 2012. So we are coming on to our 11th year now. So we had multiple ideas. One was, of course, to bring in appreciation of modern contemporary film and art. Secondly, it was to have the communities living their work together. And I think lastly, there was an element of tourism. But it was a smaller element. And I think living there, you see that tourism is changing. There's mass tourism in the way that we have never seen. Cars are driving up all the way, in our area from Punjab, from Jammu, the traffic jams. Everyone's going to see the same things and do the same things. And so it hit us that, of course, having traveled in many parts of the world, that there are many different ways of travel and tourism, and an event could be one of them. And so, in fact, in the first year of the festival, I went to Simla to meet the Himachal government, and I said, would you support us? And they did support us a little, but the tourism person said, why are we supporting you? How is it helping us? And that was only 10 years ago. So I know so much has shifted because now they are thinking about lots of events and what to do. And things shift very fast. And I think that's the other interesting thing in our larger conversation here is if we do work on many of the subjects that we care about, we can shift opinions. We can shift the way tourists see things if we really work hard at it. And we've seen that happen with many issues around the world, with gender issues and other issues. We can also try to alert the tourist or the person who's coming from outside to understand that the people that they are looking at or working with or eating in their restaurants are the same. They're not others. And I think that is a very important thing that as a project of this nature can do. So apart from running the film festival, which is first weekend of November, it's a 4-day festival. We have 3 screens. We show films from around the world. And we try to bring the filmmakers. And the idea is to create an intimate atmosphere where everyone comes together and actually talks about issues, because we feel like that's the important thing. The discussions are important. So that is the kind of main thing we do. But then we realize, what about the community? This is not just for tourists. We are not doing this for tourists. We are not doing this actually to make money. It's not a money-making enterprise at all. So what about the community? So we started from the first year itself, bringing villagers, school children, college children to the festival. We've also taken films to them. So we take films to the villages, to the district jail, to the, schools and colleges, like the B.Ed college, I think is a very good one because these are future teachers. And the idea is, again, to sensitize people to the issues. And these are mostly social issues, environmental issues, sustainability, gender issues. And it's been going really well. In fact, it's a much harder thing than bringing tourists or people from outside to the festival because it needs more work. They have no idea, because of the kind of education they had, of how to look at stories, what to look at when you look at a film. So we started film appreciation classes in the schools for people to have an opportunity to understand what the filmmakers were trying to say, what are the subtle messages, how to see those. So that's kind of our main work in the community. And then we thought, we've also got to nurture talent. And so for nurturing talent, what we've done is we've started a Himalayan fellowship program where we brought filmmakers from the Himalayan regions. And I think we've done it for about 7 years. And it's been quite good, not only because we mentor these filmmakers, but also because we create networks of filmmakers all the way from, say, Ladakh to Arunachal. So some of the filmmakers have got to know each other. And during COVID years, we did something online where we had 16 filmmakers from including Nepal and Bhutan, doing an online workshop, and they learned about script writing. So again, people came together and talked about the ideas, and I think that went also quite well. I think there's a lot more work to be done. I think there's a lot we can do, but I think today that's what our discussion's about, and hopefully we'll come to that. Thank you.
You kind of overcome the language barrier when you're bringing films to the communities, in the schools, colleges?
That's a good question because everything is subtitled in English, but for the community program, we select films that are actually in Hindi. So it means we limit the films we can show them. Because we are not able to actually dub or subtitle films. Yeah.
Tsewang, coming to you. I was telling you I went to Ladakh in June, and stunning. I'm sure most of you have gone there. What a beautiful place, but crowded, I think especially this tourist season, after the last 2 years of what we all went through, I think it was revenge in a kind of way. So you've grown up there. You have seen the change that has happened over the years, decades maybe. How do you think this influx of tourists has changed the Ladakhi way of life? And is there any way we can save the cultural traditions of Ladakh in spite of the tourists?
Yeah, thank you so much, Sonali, and thank you so much, UNESCO and Royal Enfield for this opportunity. I was saying yesterday that it couldn't have been timelier than this, especially in the context of Ladakh, because Ladakh is really going through a lot. And so talking about the change, I think what Ladakh has been facing is a tremendous change in a very short span of time. So maybe just to tell you a little bit about some of the major developments that have happened till now in Ladakh. The first flight flew into Ladakh in 1948, and the first vehicles rolled into Ladakh in the 1960s. And so these are the disruptors which really kind of influenced a lot, impacted a lot the local community, the intangible cultural heritage, and all of that we are talking about. I'll come to that later. So talking about tourism, because there are so many things to talk about, and it's good. The advantage of speaking the end is there are so many things already. So there's a context, and so whatever I say, I think just will build into that. So talking about tourism in Ladakh is it was started in the year I was born. So the tourism in Ladakh is as old as me, actually, 1974 to be exact. Ever since, there have been so much changes. Again, tourism, looking at tourism as a disruptor. There's been so many changes. A lot of them are good. A lot of them not necessarily that good. Tourism isn't a double-edged sword, that it can really do a lot of damage if you don't do things properly. And that is something that all across the industry, everyone has understood that, that is very important. So just reminiscing some of my own childhood, how it was in Ladakh. I grew up in a very small village called Skirbuchan in western part of Ladakh. I don't know how many of you have been to Ladakh though. Can I just see how many of you have been to Ladakh? Just raise your hands. Okay, almost all of you, except there's a Ladakhi actually, that's the humor. So anyway, so yes, it's been really quite a journey. Growing up in the village, I remember that we used to have all these intangible cultural heritages, like one of them, a very prominent one, is the cooperative farming, that people really would come together and help one another and finish each other's work turn-wise. And so there was no stress, there was no pressure. Everyone just would go on their own paces, and then, things will be done. As we say that nature does not hurry, similarly, people in Ladakh did not hurry. And that troubled many people. Then I'll tell you how that is. That was one of the most beautiful things that has disappeared from many places in Ladakh. The other thing that I remember is that we used to, as kids, we used to go around the village in the winter, burning this tussock grasses, the bunch grasses, the stalk of which you used to make baskets, weave baskets, and that needed to be burned. And that was a culture that was nurtured through the ages, and we had great fun in doing that. We just used to rip a rubber sole of a shoe and then just light it, and then just go around to lighting all the tussock grasses. It was beautiful, really enjoyed it. The whole village, lit up in a way, like a small, not fires. I mean, it did cause fire also, the wish. So that was, again, these things I really remember very vividly. And another thing that was really nice was this storytelling culture that was very vibrant in Ladakh. I remember, our parents used to put us to sleep, telling all these folk stories, beautiful stories. And there is the tradition of, the kids, the adults would ask the kids to always say Inju at the end of a sentence or a couple of sentences. For example, once there were 3 sisters in a valley or something, so we had to say Inju. And so the reason for doing that was that the adults wanted to make sure that the kids have fallen asleep or not. So there was a way for them to check whether they're still awake, listening to the story, or they have fallen asleep. If they have fallen asleep, then they won't continue, So it was a beautiful culture, that I really remember so vividly. And so that's sort of the cultural, intangible cultural heritage that we had. They are languishing. And that is something that we need to revive, because ultimately, I think the most important thing is that all of us need to realize that we are doing all of this to make ourselves happy. And economic well-being is not the only thing that we should pursue if you really want to be happy, because all of these things that I told you, it ensured our ecological well-being. For example, by burning those grasses, we had very vibrant, beautiful green grasses during summer. So that was important, because the dark spot would absorb more sun's energy, and so that will increase the soil temperature. That was very important from an ecological perspective. So that ecological well-being is very important also to keep ourselves happy. That is something that we are forgetting as a modern society, that living in cities, disconnected from nature and natural processes. So the other thing is, of course, the social well-being, the cooperative farming. That is the social well-being. That is also very important to keep yourself happy. And then cultural well-being, the storytelling, all of those are important. And we used to also go putting fresh juniper twigs on offerings to the gods and goddesses. So spiritual well-being, for example, that is very important also to keep ourselves happy. So that is something somewhere we're missing the point that in the pursuit of happiness, we are just going after just one aspect of that whole things, the entire spectrum of things that we need to keep ourselves happy, and then we're just pursuing one goal, and that is exactly what is happening in Ladakh at the moment, because in the 1970s, all these bureaucrats who would come from Jammu and Kashmir and the plains, they would tell us that Ladakh cannot progress, or it cannot be developed. The reason the Ladakhis are not greedy enough was their a thought and their line of thinking. And so in a way that really made Ladakhis very inferior in many ways, but not, that those kind of statements, but at the same time following that, a lot of tourists, especially the Western tourists, coming, flaunting money and showing, okay, can you do this? I'll give you money. And we would also go around as kids, actually, one pen, one bonbon, one chocolate, French, that sort of thing. I do remember as a kid, we went around that without any understanding of, but we were pretty happy, actually. We took pride in our culture also. So that era was beautiful with all of these things, the entire set of things that are necessary to really ensure your happiness, all of them were there. But at some point, then slowly, once the youth started looking outside, got exposed to a lot of things outside, and people talking about a lot of negative things about these, these kind of cultures is primitive, backward, and things like that. Somehow, then there was a dip in the self-esteem or whatever of Ladakhis, and then it's slowly coming up. So it was a V-shaped thing that we went through, actually, in terms of confidence and self-esteem and all of that. So that's how it has been, actually. And so, culture-wise, all of those people have started taking pride in the culture, in their way of lives and all, and so that is good. But if you really look at the trajectory of the growth of tourism in Ladakh, then it's been going like that, as you said. So somehow that is where we need to, the youth especially today, need to understand that in Ladakh today, there's a lot of economic well-being, but there's very little well-being of all the other aspects, the social well-being, the cultural well-being, the emotional, spiritual well-being, and all of that. And that is not enough. And many youths are realizing it, but by the time they realize it, then we would have done a lot of incorrigible, irreversible damage to the whole system. And that is something that at this point, I feel it's my responsibility and responsibility of people like us to really start raising that awareness and really put in people's consciousness that economic well-being itself is not good. There are a lot of other things that you need to think about. So I think there are a lot of things to talk about in issues and all that. I think if I get in there, then I won't come out. So I'll just stop there, and if there is any question, then I'll take them later. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tsewang. Actually, building back the trust of the communities themselves, in this age of modernity, so important. I'm going to do a quick round with all of you, with one last question for each one of you. Malika ji, you were very closely involved with Voices of Rural India. How important was that, and how it was lovely to hear from the communities themselves. So did they kind of empower them, and were they enthusiastic about Voices of Rural India and the storytelling traditions of the region?
Yeah, so just to give you an idea of what Voices of Rural India is, it was a pandemic project. Actually, you shouldn't call it a pandemic project, a lockdown project, because life was just locked down. And for those of us, we run a small community enterprise called Himalayan Arc, and suddenly we were all jobless. The community that got in its cash income. One thing particularly important about rural tourism, I just need to flag this, is that tourism can only be a subset of your economy. The minute you make it the centerpiece and not your traditional lifestyle, you're actually held ransom to this larger tourism market. But when the lockdown happened, tourists weren't coming, so we weren't earning. And essentially, what do we do when tourists come in? We're also sharing our story with them. Essentially, like you said, it's all about storytelling. It's narrative building. It's a narrative you create. Our guides were telling stories, and we felt, well, this is a good opportunity to get guides, homestay owners who don't have any other livelihood to actually use the digital medium to begin to tell stories with the phone, simple, or oral storytelling. And for 2 years it worked well. If you are interested, you should just visit Voices of Rural India. We have 50 stories from many states across the country, and they're gems. They're simple stories like you just shared, of your childhood. Stories that we've heard, but we're losing so fast because nobody's retelling them. If you just look at us, all of us, some of us are dressed traditionally, but we've all got homogenized minds, imaginations, and those things that we grew up with are just disappearing. So when you say, did it impact people? Yes, it did. Suddenly our stories were worth telling. We were seeing them. Outlook Traveler helped us publish a special issue, and suddenly, Kamla Pandey is storyteller, Trilok Singh Rana has written about his, carving in his home.
Likhai.
And, then other magazines are inviting us to write and tell stories. So there's this sense of, unfortunately, you have to say reclaiming your identity, because what a pity. Who we are, we have to reclaim, rediscover, and that sense of self-esteem that comes with it. And like I said in the earlier bit, ownership. I feel all of us are interpreters here. We all tell other people's stories. I'm here to tell my village story. But somewhere the village folk and the people should be telling their own stories. There's an authenticity, there's a rawness, there is a reality that I think Voices of India helped with, but the lockdown is over, and unfortunately it's business as usual. Again, we are lapsing back into our old ways, which is a pity, but we understand this is the struggle. Yeah.
Where do you see yourself and the project with Mool going forward? Briefly.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and before I respond to that, I just wanted to say this one thing. As an example of, again, intangible cultural heritage. There's this very famous Kashmiri poet, saint, Sheikhul Alam, Nuruddin Nurani was his name, but he said this phrase, "An posh teliyeli one posh," and it's a Kashmiri phrase in the Kashmiri language. So, I'll just give you the loose sort of translation, which means, the life will sustain till forests sustain. So, in short, he has given us the key to all the climate change discourse. With all the modern science and knowledge and experiments and all the tools and sort of the looking glasses, we are still debating what is happening. But, the key, the basic idea and how to deal with climate change is right there in that one half sentence for us. So, again, it's intangible cultural heritage, and a lot of it is subconscious and unconscious, and unfortunately the present paradigm does not count the subconscious or the unconscious and a lot of related phenomena. So coming back to the vision for the next 5 years, as I was saying, we are working with a lot of students, a lot of educational establishments. We have recently signed an MOU with a local university. We're negotiating with other universities, and a lot of people are coming to us. Thankfully, we're sort of getting a lot of attention, and anybody who comes there, number one, is surprised that something like this exists in Kashmir. Then the second level is, they are very happy. They feel they get back in touch with themselves. It's easy for them to reconnect with themselves and get into this reflective phase where they are sort of reflecting about obviously the surroundings, that is the eco village, but also obviously about themselves and where they are and how, because all of us have dreams and all of us are heroes in our stories, and we are meant to be playing that role. And unfortunately, as I was saying, a lot of the external considerations are making us sacrifice creativity for security. But yeah, so we are sort of creating that example, and a lot of people are showing interest and wanting to replicate it, and are already, some people have started replicating it. And we are also offering sort of services and sort of programs to help people do that. So we are offering consulting as well. So yeah, we hope to see this ecological entrepreneurship, as I explained earlier, taking care of ecology, culture, human needs and resources, as well as integrating technology with it. And I would again say, to make a profitable sort of business livelihood, because I think that is one of the primary challenges of young people all across, because they are worried about making it through. And so that's why we had to shift from the non-profit to the for-profit, to create an example, so that, which is, because as I said, if you want to preserve ecology or culture, bring it to life, and connect people's lifestyles to it and livelihoods to it, and then it will preserve itself, and you will actually improve and enhance it. And that's the way it is supposed to be, and that's what our traditional sort of cultural wisdom also shows us the way. So yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity, and all the best to everybody and to us as well. Thank you.
Ritu, very briefly, any plans of scaling up DIFF?
No, so yeah, we are just going to scale up slowly by having more auditoriums. We want to do programs, maybe travel with DIF. I think we've had some invitations to take the festival elsewhere. But I think there's a lot more work to be done in the community, and that's where, with more support, because it's not a profitable venture at all, that would be very important. Community and Himalayan area, to bring voices of filmmakers together to create those networks. I think that's something we would like to do.
Hope, I mean, while you said pastoralism is something that is kind of slowly fading away, but do you see new opportunities like cuisine, etc., a complete Ladakhi way, which is coming up in spite of the influx of tourists?
Yes, definitely. So one thing that what Malika ji just mentioned, the homogenization, that is the major problem all across the world. Like, everything is just becoming very similar everywhere. So if that's the case, then what is the motivation and what is the incentive to travel? If you find everything, whatever you have to have at home, there's just no incentive, right? And so our major effort has been actually building the character of the place as much as possible, and retain whatever we have, and then make it more unique, and so which would serve as an incentive to the traveler, for the travelers, And the other thing that I just would like to briefly talk about is that, as many of you probably would know, that this is the organization which had started the first conservation-linked homestays in the entire Himalayas. And we really feel a great responsibility of managing the garbage, the waste. That is a big issue all across the Himalayas. In Ladakh, of course, all the more, because it's a very fragile ecosystem. There's so many issues related to waste, and that is something that we have been getting into, for example, helping villagers manage their waste in all these homestay villages. Currently, we have some 200 homestays across Ladakh in over 40 villages. And so we really feel it's our responsibility to do something in that field. And that is something that we are getting into. And I think that is something that we should learn from how our forefathers lived. And I just want to, I don't know if you have a little bit, 2-3 minutes, and I would like to tell you another brief story. You see that gown on your back. That's how the traditional dress in Ladakh. And so when I was a kid, the villagers, people would wear a gown, and so the fortunate ones would get a new gown every year on the new year. And so they would take great pride in that. But the old one, is not thrown away. I mean, I was not thrown away. Not many people do that now. The old one is always was worn on the top, so that the new one below remains fresh, and it enhances its durability also. And so when there were a lot of holes in that upper one, the top one, then they would use it for patchwork or to make some pillow covers or kitchen towels or all whatever they could think of. And when it could not really, when it was in tatters, then they would take it out to the agricultural field to plug all the gaps in the leakages in the water channel. So they did not use waste anything, basically. Everything what they used so judiciously. So that was really the epitome of frugality and sustainable living, which we really need to learn from and try to. So those are the intangible cultural heritage that we really need to take forward. And that's something that we are trying to instill these kind of things in youth, in the children of Ladakh. Yeah, so basically that's something that we are now currently working on, the waste management with like-minded people, and especially the youth, because they have a major stake in this, being the inheritors of our heritage, the culture, the current culture. Yeah, so thanks.
Thank you so much, panelists, for this extremely interesting discussion. I would encourage all the audience members to catch hold of them, because the stories they can tell you is incredible, because they live and breathe what they do, in their communities. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you, audience.
I think being right in front, I had to listen pretty intently to everyone. So actually, it's quite incredible because I have something to say to everyone, considering there's a context. So talking about Uttarakhand, I did my schooling in Uttarakhand in a boarding school. However, I don't think in any way it took away from my culture. However, it reiterated the need to be inclusive and respectful towards all cultures. Now, having said that, and that being my basic background, I have studied outside my native city of Kapurthala. So I have been working, studying all throughout. I was in the media for over a decade, about 12 years. So I understand the need for communication and how, if it is used effectively, it can actually change realities. Change is inevitable. How much ever we may try to use the word preserve, it is not going to be preserved because we all are going to go through that period of transition. A couple of points, actually. When it comes to local communities, I think the narrative has to first be creative amongst the communities, so that sense of pride has to be instilled. While they are there, I think we all have been fed with stories about how, somebody left a village और वो जाके बड़े शहर में जाके उसने इतना काम अपना कमाया, इतने पैसे कमाए. So I think that narrative in itself makes it like a huge ambition for people from villages to go to the big cities. So I think that would be a huge impediment in actually, like we said, preserving that culture. So that narrative has to be created with the locals and then communicated to the people who are then coming to those villages. I think another point that I found very interesting, and this is what I personally feel as well, I have recently got into tourism. And what we do is we take young children and try to expose them to the outdoors and the incredible biodiversity in the country, in India. And what we do find very difficult is that people want to be responsible, tourists want to be responsible, but they don't know how to go about it. So I think there has to be better congruence between an academic approach and a more realistic /exotic approach. Now, I do understand that when you talk about people being the others and this exotic approach towards going to a place, but otherwise, how would a traveler get attracted to go to that place in the first instance anyway? If I get what I get in Delhi and I'm going to another place to get the same thing, I would not make that effort. Having said that, I think it is also very, very important that local communities need to set some ground rules which need to be in congruence with the government to make sure when the traveler also comes, there's certain like non-negotiables, whether it's garbage collection or trash being thrown. We are the same tourists who are going abroad, and when there's a fine of $200 when you're putting something on the road, we don't do it. So it's not like we cannot be sensitized. I just think there need to be slightly better action points in place. And finally, I think I currently also handle communication and culture for a technology company. And, technology is something that we have to bring into the fold and not see it as an enemy, because now this is our way of being. So I think things like digital marketing and also marketing it correctly, like I said, a kind of congruence between like the academic and the slightly more realistic approach that needs to be taken to take these things forward, because ultimately, whatever our goal is, I think communication will be key. So these were just a couple of points I thought I'd make.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for being here, every one of you. As I said, it's a weekday. So glad to see a filled hall. And before the panelists leave, Sonali leaves, thank you so much. We do have a token of appreciation for you. Can I invite Tsewang, my colleague, to come and hand them over?